Hi, everybody. Rebecca Nelson here, Wine Club Director with Becker Vineyards, with you once again for another fantastic virtual tasting. Tonight, we're trying another library wine. We've been doing this whole week from our wines from 2012. And so to finish off the week, we'll be trying our 2012 Cabernet Sauvignon Reserve from the Wilmeth Family Vineyards. Hopefully you've had that open for a while, either decanting or airing in your glass, and have that swirling next to you. Tonight, to lead you through this tasting, we have our winemaker, John Leahy, with us once again. We have Dr. Joe Becker with us, and we also have our general manager, Bret Pernew. And they're gonna walk you guys through this fantastic wine. I hope everyone enjoys it, and I look forward to seeing you again next week. Cheers.
Cheers, Rebecca. Thanks for that wonderful introduction. And before we get going on this crazy train on Friday, Dr. Becker, Joe, would you care to lead us out with a few words?
I'd love to. I've missed being on these for a few times because unfortunately I've been quarantined in my dad's wine cellar. If I'm nice, my dad will slide some cheese under the door. But fortunately, I found an opener and some Riedel stemware. And for the last 2 weeks, I've done okay. My liver probably hasn't, but I've survived. And I told Dad today that unfortunately, a lot of the older wines are more susceptible to the virus, so they probably ought to be quarantined with me for another 2 weeks. But nonetheless, all kidding aside, as always, our hearts go out to everybody that is on the front lines, nurses, physicians, friends, medical school classmates, residency fellowship classmates. I hear from many of them a couple times a week, and know what they're dealing with, and know that their hands are full, and know that they probably are not able to wash this. But I hope that anybody that can, that we offer a few moments of escape from everything that's going on.
Well said. Well said. I will add my many thanks to everybody on that. And also, just as a personal note, I have family in San Antonio, doctors and police officers, and I want them both to be very, very careful. So.
And cheers to them, John.
Yeah. Cheers. So, Bret, what are we drinking tonight?
Well, another one that I got to go into the winery library to go pick out, which was another rough day at work. This is the 2012 Wilmeth Vineyards Cabernet, and again, I think that we've talked about this all week. John's first year in Texas. And we got to take this epic trip out to the Wilmeth Vineyard, and I'll talk about that in a little bit after we kind of get into the wine, but I'll go through that a little bit as we go through this.
That was a hell of a trip. Okay, so everybody wants to know, were you all choked up and teary-eyed when you got back to your office and saw your birthday presents?
No.
I was lying because I heard it. It was this.
Yeah. Yeah. I was expected to get back and get, we were at the coast for a few days and come back to work, and it's always stressful to leave and then come back, and then I was ready just to get going this morning, and there was balloons everywhere, and I asked Angie, Jeanette, I asked Jeanette whose idea was this to put all these balloons, so they swiftly met the blade of a box cutter.
Well, listen, I want to get everybody into this wine really quickly. So I've decanted. I missed my hour and a half mark, so this has only been decanting behind me here for about 45 minutes, but that's why I keep swirling it a little bit. It's opening up very nicely. It is not, oddly enough, as closed in as the Merlot was on Wednesday. They're both equal age, but this one also saw less barrel time than the Merlot. So I want everybody to give it a swirl, a sniff, and a taste. And I'm telling you what, I'm really loving this nose. There are times I think I just want to keep smelling the wine instead of actually sipping it. But so, Joe, what do you? Just real briefly, and we're going to do this a couple of times tonight because I really want to see the curve, if you will, on how this develops. What are you getting out of the nose initially, Joe?
It's interesting. Sometimes when I taste our older cabs, I get sort of a Bordeaux note. This Cabernet, this fruit is interesting because I feel like it always starts off very dark rich notes, and it's interesting to me that on the nose over time, I start to get a little bit more. I really feel like in this particular vintage, the darker fruit has held up over time. Almost the black cherry, the blackberry, a little bit of the jamminess that you get on the nose. It's interesting how this wine has aged.
Yes, I think so too. So Bret, what are you getting initially right off the get-go?
Well, originally, Joe stole my answer, but the dark cherry. But here's what I'm getting a little different. I think that what I'm tasting is almost like a cooked cherry. You know, the sweetness of the cherry that's there, and I think as those skins kind of start to maybe fall apart when you're cooking it, that's what I'm picking up on this.
Yeah, it's funny. So we were talking earlier in the week about a balanced wine and how a high alcohol wine, if it's balanced, you can't really smell the alcohol. It's funny because this is very low in alcohol, 13.3.
Yeah.
And I get just a whiff of that alcohol initially. So it's not high in alcohol, but it appears like when you smell it, you don't look at the label. It's like, is this going to be hot? It's not when you taste it. But after I get through that alcohol, I do, Bret, I have to agree with you. I get some more cooked fruit notes. So a little more jamminess on there.
And John, it's interesting because I decanted this for about 2 hours, and I think for me that alcohol note you're describing is really settled out over time in the decanter.
Yeah. So we had fun putting this together. It does have just a little bit of Merlot in there. And then I believe it's 95% Cabernet, 5% Merlot on the blend. So this was, of course, the first year that I got to deal with the Wilmeth property along with everything else. So the 2012s are, for me, it's kind of revisiting, like, unfortunately for me, in some of the wines, I'm like, man, I really messed that up. And I'm like, why didn't I do it this way? I should have used more French oak. Oh, wait a minute. I had 5 barrels of French oak. So, but on this wine, what I'm really, really happy about is the meniscus. It's just starting to oxidize slightly. So it's a rather muted magenta on the edge, or an orangish red. But when you smell it, it has no oxidation property whatsoever. And that's what I'm really kind of digging right now.
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting to me that the direction this has gone in, I didn't quite finish that thought, but I feel like this has gone more in the Russian River, maybe Alexander Valley, Cabernet direction. And it's just kind of interesting how that's evolved over time, and I feel like different vintages in Texas kind of go in different directions.
Yeah, it really is amazing when we line these up from 12 through 18, the progression that you can see. I want to jump in before we get to Bret's story on the vineyard. We just got a couple questions here. One, why do you decant the wine? When you get a bottle with dinner at a restaurant, they don't decant it. Well, if you're at a restaurant and they're not decanting the wine, you can certainly ask them to do so. If they cannot, then what I would recommend is have them pour the wine early into the glass and leave the bottle without the cork. There are a couple of ways around that. Or to go to a restaurant that does decant. No, I'm kidding. If it's your favorite restaurant, just ask them if they can. If they don't have the ability, then go ahead and just pre-pour in the glass, say pour right away, and we'll wait till the main course for trying it. That'll help. But I found
that most sommeliers at a lot of the restaurants are happy to do it. They're proud of their wine list, and just not enough people ask them to do it. So I always feel comfortable doing that.
Oh, you know what? Okay, there was another one. When I uncorked this bottle, the cork was dark, about 1/3 of its height. The others haven't been like this. Well, one of the things that happens, cork, when you're using cork, the reason we use cork in a bottle is because we have to compress it. We push it in the top of the bottle. This is all done automated on the bottling line. And then the cork immediately expands out to the diameter of the vessel. Occasionally, that cork doesn't expand out quickly enough, and a little tiny bit of wine will seep up the edges and get trapped between the cork and the glass, and that can stain or darken that cork. It does not ruin it. It does not oxidize it. As long as it doesn't make it all the way through, you're fine. So it's not considered seepage, but that's one of the reasons. The other one, cork is porous. So occasionally when they cut the cork out of the bark, you'll get just the right pour, and it may absorb wine up to a third to half of the height of the cork, and you'll start to see a dark staining on there as well. So that could be two of the reasons why.
John, could you comment on the tannins in this wine? Because this seems to have just a very nice, soft, integrated tannin structure to me over time.
It does. So 2012, we had an incredibly nice and ripe year. The tannins in the skin do two things for the wine when you're fermenting them. One, they act as an antioxidation. They absorb that oxygen. They prevent those a free oxygen radical in the wine from oxidizing. And two, they offer not just the structure in the finished wine, but color stability. So if you have fully even ripe skins on the berries, you're pretty good about that. You will end up with a wine like this. This is fully structured to me. In other words, it's a full tannin structure balanced with the fruit. The tannin and the alcohol both act as a mild preservative while you're aging the wine. So the tannins will form longer and longer chains as it ages. Here's my nice helix. They connect together, forming longer chains. When they're young, green tannins, they're short, they taste bitter. As they get longer, they taste more round on the palate. So let's get to Bret. He's sitting there looking very comfortable, so we want to bother him. So, Bret, before you get into your stories, any comments on the wine as you've sipped it a couple of times? Any new development there?
No, we did not get to decant ours as long here because I was late getting to Main Street. But I do think that I've tasted this a million times in the library on the library tours, and this is one that, as we talked about our stockpile of wines that are in our cellar for future release, I think that this one, the mouthfeel is still there. It's not going off on any kind of weird vibe, and the comment that I always make between the Canada cabs and the Wilmeth cabs, I think that they're very different when we release them. The Canada sometimes needs a little more time because of the pyrazines and the green notes that we get off their vineyard, and this one kind of has that dark berry from the beginning, and it's still there. And it's always interesting to me as they kind of age, and this one being as old as what it is, getting to try those two side by side, that they're still holding up really well, and I'm glad that we have a little bit of it in the cellar still that we can hopefully visit in 10 years still.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So just real quick, I want to get back to, there have been a couple of comments about decanting. Somebody said put it in a blender for 30 seconds. I really, I'm sure that'll add a lot of air, but there's an easier way. So you saw me dump my water glass in the fern behind me. You take your water glass at a dining room table or when you're at the restaurant, just, it's a pretty simple method. You could just do that once. Don't do it with water in the glass, but and then just swirl it. So that's one way of adding oxygen, especially if you don't have a powered battery operated blender there at the table. This will be easier.
But I think it's important to note too that for people that are getting into wine, that a lot of the, part of the elegance of sitting at a table having a wine that's this old is it being decanted. Yes. And that's why Riedel makes so many cool decanters. But really and truly, if you're drinking something that's off their regular wine list, most of the time a Sauvignon Blanc or a Chardonnay, that's current. It doesn't need to be decanted for it to be. But again, it might change over the time that you're sitting there. So don't think that, you have to decant everything, obviously. And we've had that question a lot in the tasting room. Why are you opening this important? You didn't decant it. It's like, well, it's a 2008-19 Chardonnay, that we bottled 6 months ago. And yes, it's going to change with air, but that's how that works.
Right. Sure. I also have a little pour spout that's an aerator in my bottle that I can, and I do use that when I'm pouring it into the decanter to try to venturi to swirl it out a little bit on there. So our trip to Tokyo, Texas. 2012.
I don't know that I've told this whole story ever. No, just teasing.
Great.
Yeah. No, but I think it was funny when John was there that first year that he pretty much had to go on like 7 job interviews a day with the growers that were visiting. They were like meeting this dude from California and his crazy shirts and his crazy socks, and all they said is, I hope you don't screw up the wine that's been made there for the last 20 or 15 years at that point. And it was a fun trip, and I think that Jet is the one that got the most fun out of just kind of feeling John out to kind of see what he would say. And if you ever get a chance to go to Jet's vineyard, and it's not just a visit to Tokyo, Texas, but usually he likes to give us all tests, and he asks you, how much do you know about viticulture, or how much, and it was just funny to me that every time we go up there, whether we take the new winemaker or whether we're taking our team up there, wine club directors or tasting room staff to see the vineyards, he always gets a big kick out of just, kind of testing everybody. And most of the time we have answers for him, and unless it comes to music or to how to make the sand not blow in Lubbock. So.
No, okay, but what you're glossing over is just extraordinarily dry sense of humor. And he put on that very thick West Texas accent for my benefit, because I'd ask him something and he'd be going, well, and he'd sit there and kind of look around, like do the crazy eye, how he does. It's like, I'm like, does that work? Does that really work on people? He goes, most of the time.
It's like he's saying, John, I don't think you're from around here.
Yeah, exactly. But hey, buddy, I don't store my Harley in the kitchen either. So I think Gay put her foot down on that one.
Yeah, they did finally move it out.
Yeah, exactly. But I thought that makes perfect sense. Put it in the living room where you can keep an eye on it.
Well, and I without telling too many secrets about what's in his house, but the other thing that I always crack up is, you go sit down and watching the guy from California sit down and go, wow, there's a gun. There's another gun. And that, there's, he has an arsenal. Like, nobody better go steal from Jet.
Yeah. Oh, my favorite was when we went skeet shooting after the first harvest, the end when we were getting ready for the skeet shooting competition. And, and my introduction to Tannerite. That was kind of fun.
Yeah.
A Yamaha. Okay, Jet just commented, Yamaha, come on.
Oh, really?
Yes, he likes his comfort. Okay, so back to the wine. So we did this wine actually did see a fair portion of American oak. The Merlot, again, my preference on Merlot has always been American oak. I love French oak on Merlot, but in 2012, I was told by Doc to use the new French Allier barrels for the Viognier. That's what he wanted done. And so I promptly used it for the Sauvignon Blanc, and some of it in the Cabernet. And yes, we did use some in the Viognier, but we had quite a few barrels. But the Cabernet, Jet's Cabernet, we aged equal portions of the new oak, which was less than 30%, equal portions on American and French. So we did not have a lot of French, and we've increased the French over the last couple of years by about maybe 5 to 10%. So not a whole lot, but
and I think that's interesting. I think that's interesting. And just to step back for a second, how do we do a similar ratio with Canada Cab, or do you use a different ratio there?
Well, I plan on a very similar ratio, but I will switch it according to the quality of the fruit when it gets onto the crush pad. So
okay.
If I think, I also will switch it up, Joe, if I think we're able to age it for longer than 18 months. I'll start putting a little more in French oak because it's a tighter grain. So really to benefit from that barrel, you need to leave it in there about 20 to 24 months minimum on that tight grain. And it reduces the amount of oxygen play, but it also allows it to slowly absorb those toasted notes from the oak. So the tighter the grain in the barrel, the longer you want to age the wine in the barrel. So if I need to turn around like our Tempranillo that we turn around within a year, which is perfectly fine for Tempranillo, we'll put a lot of it in American looser grain oak or neutral oak. And then neutral oak, I'm not too worried about the grain tightness on neutral oak.
Okay.
Anything that's 4 or 5 years old.
And the only reason I make that point is I'm sure Brett could comment. One of the fun things has been that we've been able to do these single vineyard designated Cabernets, and Brett will tell you that this is Canada's vineyard is not very far from Jet's vineyard, and as Brett once showed me, Miss Canada's vineyard's a little funny turn in the road, but it's just interesting the completely different profile. I think these are two of the best Cabernet vineyards in Texas.
Yeah, they are. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Brett.
Well, and I did talk to Jet a little bit about the 12 vintage because we have been doing the vertical, so we're trying to remember and compare the different ones. The 12 harvest was early. He had a little bit of rain early, and then he had a lot of rain kind of later on in the season that they were missing. They were kind of dancing around these showers, and in the 11 he said we had this crazy drought up there that they didn't have as much rain, and as they're coming off of that, that does have such a big influence on what this 12 is tasting like. And then on top of that, the fact that, John got to use all the barrels he wanted, that's never a bad thing,
I don't think it's a bad thing at all. I was hired to make the wine.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, just so we're clear on that. Yeah, after 9 years, I think the other thing I like between both Jet and Canada, Joe, back to your point, so looking at the soils map and then the geology around there, and it's very, very interesting, just in that short range. So I've got some information I need to acquaint myself with, so I'm speaking correctly about whether it's the Quaternary or the Holocene or the, whatever the names are, the correct names. I am going to get in so much trouble with my wife if I mess this up. So what I'm saying is that the age, Canada's is on a much older formation, because of the way it's washed out, where Jets has a little more alluvium. And so there's, even though they're in the same, pretty much the same area, it's really interesting to see that map, the geology map of that part of Texas.
And they do have a little temperature change as well between the Canada Vineyard and the Wilmeth. Jet can probably comment on this to you, John, if he's still listening. But
he will. I mean,
it's a couple degrees difference usually all the time. But when I was talking to him on the day today on the way over here, their high temperature up there since last Monday Monday was 100 plus.
Yeah. Between
110 in some places and 115 degrees all the way through Wednesday of next week. And so that's definitely not a great thing past, we kind of thinking about 111, 110, 111. Those vines kind of shut down and they have a hard time kind of cruising, so.
Yeah, they start shutting down over 95 degrees. They'll start, respiration will come to a screeching halt. Those vacuoles just close up on those leaves. But,
and the question is, when it gets that hot, if they wake back up or not, and then provide nutrients to that fruit. We saw a little bit of that last year,
right?
Or 2 years ago when it was that hot, and we kind of hung some of the bricks started hanging late in the season, and the grapes kind of looked okay, but they just couldn't go.
Right. Well, I mean, there's more than one way to stall the ripening. It's not just cold or anything. Yeah. So I agree. So they love. There's a broad range, but they love their distinct range of temperature on there. So back to this wine, and I'm sure Jet will comment on the soil and the geology if he's not riding his Kawasaki around the vineyard or Suzuki or whatever it is. That's just to get him to comment again. Anyway, back to I'm looking to see if we have any questions. So everybody out there, if you've got questions, please feel free to ask them. We will try to answer them as best we can. I'm actually enjoying this. I have enjoyed both, last week when we did the 12 Spectrum, and then this week with the 12 Wilmeth, it's absolutely fantastic. But Joe, Brett, we're getting to that point about food, and it's Friday, so late last year was 2013 is what Jet said. The food. So Joe, what would you pair with this 2012 as a library event wine?
So let me put my food order into my curbside guide. I'd like my tenderloin medium rare, maybe with a little chive butter and some Gouda in my mashed potatoes. Great, thank you. Just slide it under the door.
Good luck with that. So you're thinking tenderloin, are you?
I think, but with some mashed potatoes with a little Gouda in it, maybe a little chive butter, maybe some broccoli to kind of complete the picture.
Perfect. Brett, what would you do?
Oh man, I don't know. I've been digging quail lately. I think quail with this, even with and I'm going back to like the best quail that I ever made in my house was on accident, and I put dried cherries in it and then put wine on top of it, and that's what I remember when you were asking me about the flavors of the first part, is that dark cooked cherry, and I think that this would just scream on the top of the quail if it was cooked right.
I have to agree with you. I think it would. You kind of stole a little tiny amount of what I was going to suggest, which was a dried cherry compote glaze on pork tenderloin. I think that would do really, really well with this.
So John, let me back up for a second, because when you started before we went live, you were asking about the ideal wine to pair with lamb, red Burgundy or red Bordeaux.
Right.
And I think we're talking, red Bordeaux. We love red Burgundy, but this would be interesting if you had. I think if you had a similar sauce to what you're saying.
I'll tell you right now with lamb, I would do, depending whether it was leg, rack, or chops. But like with a leg of lamb, this would go very well, especially if you could take that outer membrane off and pierce that lamb, shove cloves of garlic around it and a little bit of rosemary in there, and then slow roast it on the leg of lamb. That would do great. If you were going to do, a rack, you could French them, do the rack in the oven. I would definitely still use the rosemary, but I would put lavender and rosemary together on that with dried cherry compote as a final glaze, either a cherry or a black currant compote. This wine would do very, very well with that because of the dried fruit note. And like Bret was saying, with that dried, cherry and wine on his quail, that's a no-brainer. That it would do beautifully with this. But I also get kind of jealous of Bret and Chris when they find something they like, they go home and they start trying to cook it and cook it and cook it. Then you got 10 permutations. So if you're experimenting, Bret, just keep us in mind.
And what's so funny about that is, again, usually when we travel, if we go to, we're in Italy one year with the winery, or France, we come home, try to make what we had. But the bad part about that story is it's really fun to do it, but we always forget to write the recipe down of the one that we like. And then usually the wine gets into play and we forget. And it's like, well, was it the one that was on page 12 of this book or that? And so we have to come up with a better way to keep our system down. So we'd have the most incredible cookbook in the world if we just remembered every single one of those that it was. But once you make the perfect, loaf of bread, it's like, well, how many more loaves of bread do you need?
I remember that first focaccia you were talking about. Yeah. So somebody just said something that's kind of funny, and I have to repeat this and give the Caps full credit for this. It says, my husband worked on this joke for 5 minutes. He says to make some pulled pork and have a swine tasting.
Nah.
It's like, okay, buddy, that's my kind of joke.
Love it. Cheers to that.
Exactly. So I want everybody to do one more swirl, sniff, and taste on this, because I'm just sitting here, I'm getting these herbaceous notes coming out of here now.
Yeah.
A little bit of cedar or I might even like pencil shaving, but definitely some.
I think cedar for sure.
Yeah, on there. So Bret, what do we have next week? What's our tasting for next week's lineup?
All right, so Monday is the Reserve Viognier 17. Then we have a brand new release of 18 Culinaria that we bottled maybe a month or two ago, rolling that one out for 2018. And then we're going to follow it up with the Library 15 Culinaria, which, by the way, I think I bought half of. That was one of my favorite wines that we made in a very long time. And you want to talk about a food wine.
Hang on, Bret. My producer is telling me to share.
Yeah, so that library Culinaria should be pretty fun, and then check out the website for the next week's. We've got them picked all the way through the month of July, and after that we're probably going to be out of wine. We're going to have to start back over from the beginning, and I think we'll see a little bit different format. The harvest crew here has got to start picking grapes. And so I don't think we'll quit doing these, but we're going to switch the format up a little bit, and just so that John and I can go do the work of making the grapes hit the back door.
Well, I think we might be able to, during the wine taste, we might have a little live update at the winery.
Yeah.
When we're
That'd be fun.
Yeah. I don't think anybody wants to see us 3 times a week in that time of the year. So.
Okay, so what I'm doing? What the hell? Is it 5:30 already? Yeah, it's like grouchy McGrouch face.
Yeah.
So okay, but next week is going to be good, but 2 weeks from now, I want people to get excited about the tasting from 2 weeks from now too, because that's all the dolcettos. The 15, 17, and 18. That's 2 weeks from now. So the next couple of weeks are going to be absolutely fantastic. So.
And the Dolcetto is a new one. So the theme that we had as we were bottling this new stuff for the next 3 weeks, we're going to have a release that is a new one that hasn't been had before, with sometimes a library wine that so that's what we have.
And remind me, who's that grower of ours that grows such wonderful Dolcetto? What's his
I think
name?
his name Jet
Oh,
again.
God,
Yeah, right.
yeah, he's from this tiny little town. He drives a Yamaha, or is it a Kawasaki?
Yeah.
Jet, we love you very much, and we're very happy to have you through. But I think he can take as good as he gives.
Mhm.
A little leg pulling. So I'm going to wrap this up. I'm very excited about next week. So everybody be sure, if you haven't ordered, do so. We can get it out to you. Don't forget 2 weeks from now, we're going to be doing the Dolcettos. So we got some really good wines coming up. And we will, next week, I'm going to give everybody on hopefully Monday, if not Wednesday, we'll give you a preliminary harvest update on sugars in the vineyard. We just started our first sugar testing this week. So we'll be monitoring development there.
I might be in Lubbock on Wednesday, so I might be live from the
live
vineyard.
from downtown
Again.
Lubbock.
Yeah.
It's
Round
Friday
film.
night. All righty. Well, I want to wish everybody a great weekend, good health, and great wine. So cheers. Thanks for joining us again.